Ladies and gentlemen, we are here with episode 49, coming to you from the loft, having a good old time in Nashville, Tennessee. Brad, how you doing today?
Good, man. I'm a little jealous I'm not down there to partake in the festivities, but I know you guys sent me a picture. You had a little bit of a mix-up on the course, so that was pretty funny. Had a little RV slippage off the road, so it's crazy down there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to call anybody out, but an Oregon youngster who definitely it was quite the ordeal. Got stuck and blocked the whole exit out of the course. But we're here, we're recording, we're having a good time, and we have a very special guest joining us. But before we dive in, we as always got to thank our sponsor who makes all of this possible. Why we get to hang out with you every week. Thank you to Flippy Disc Golf for amazing apparel in the game, and keeping it great and swagged up for us here on the podcast.
Yeah, and it just as always, make sure you check out the In the Bag merch in the link below. There's a discount there for you as well. You can also find some Robbie C merch there, and soon you'll see some Foundation merch as well. So make sure you check out Flippy. Always keeping us looking great. So we appreciate Flippy. Thanks a lot, guys.
Absolutely. Well, we do want to welcome to the podcast. Huge honor to have you here. You've been on, I believe, every other podcast on the Foundation Network except for this one. Brodie Smith, how are you doing, sir?
Thanks for having me. It feels good to be on all the podcasts now.
Check. Because you even you were on Plastic Addicts at one point. A little throwback to that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Darkhorse Plastic Addicts. I was on there for a split second. So, yeah. Maybe Silas needs to bring that one back.
I think so.
Yeah. Let us know in the comments. You want to see Cy Guy back on, not just behind the camera, behind the production side of Foundation Podcast, because he does some heavy lifting for the Foundation Podcast Network, that is for sure.
Yep.
Well, Brodie, we got you on. Been with you all week, doing some caddying and seeing you attack the course. And so Brad and I wanted to bring you on, by no means are we going to do what a normal episode where it would be like, hey, I think this is a weakness in your bag. You should definitely consider a stake or something like that. But much more, want to talk to you from the pro perspective. You've built a bag now. You've come from the perspective of you've kind of been discraft only your entire life inside of disc golf. And so I want to start with as my first question to get into that. Do you feel like it's been easier to kind of dial in a bag from the get-go, knowing you only had a certain amount of options?
Yeah, I mean, if I would have joined and been able to throw any disc I wanted to, I think that would have been a bit overwhelming. I think it would have still taken me a long time. I mean, I feel like my bag this year it is the first season where I feel like my bag hasn't really changed from the previous season that much. Where last season I was still kind of inserting some new discs in my bag, and now I feel like I know exactly all the slots that I need, and it's just playing the course and seeing what the course requires and then just adding those discs to the bag. Because obviously some courses, like this course here in Nashville, there's no rollers. So I normally have 2 to 3 different roller discs. Those aren't really going to be in the bag for this tournament. There's no need for those. And I have some discs that are specific to woods golf. We're not really playing woods golf out here. There's not really going to be scrambling or anything like that. So those aren't going to be in the bag either. But being able to, kind of go through the whole lineup and try out all the discs that Discraft has to offer, I think it did. It probably got me quicker to knowing what discs I like and which discs I don't like versus having the ability of doing that with every company. But it still takes a while to get those, perfect discs in each slot. And I think that would have taken time regardless if I was an open bag or if I was specifically with one manufacturer.
Yeah, and you mentioned that this year's the first year that your bag hasn't changed a ton. What do you think has kept your bag kind of steady from last year?
I just think last year I got to a good spot where I never really felt like, oh man, I wish I had a disc that did this. where prior, I would be maybe forcing some discs to try to do a shot that they're not really supposed to do. Where now I feel like every shot that I need to throw on a course, for the most part, I have a disc for that, or I know a disc. Like me and Robbie, for example, hole 17, that was a hole that it's a very weird distance, and the disc that I would normally throw for that, which I definitely could throw. I don't know if am I supposed to say what disc I have, or is that like a spoiler? Do you guys have a?
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
all right.
no,
I didn't know if I was going to spoil something too soon. So
Yeah.
I could throw a Venom on this hole, or I could throw a Raptor, or a Captain Raptor rather. But my miss with either one of those, like if I don't throw it well, it's going OB. So I wanted to find a disc that was a little bit better suited for that specific shot, because it is the only shot on the course that's very unique for that disc. And that's why I'm probably going to put the Machete in the bag, because it's a little bit faster than the Captain Raptor as far as it will get to the spot quicker before it starts dumping. And it will be a little bit more overstable for me than the Venom. So it's like the perfect. It honestly is kind of like a beat-in Captain Raptor, I think, is exactly the disc. Funny is I took that out of my bag because I needed a more overstable Captain Raptor. I don't know if I brought that with me. So I was like, oh, the Machete actually might be perfect, because I also was throwing the Machete before the Captain Raptor even existed. So that was kind of an easy fix. So there's stuff like that I'll do kind of from tournament to tournament. But I'm not searching like and being, I'm pretty locked in on the molds I have, and it's just finding specific discs in that mold that fit the slots that I need them to.
Interesting. Yeah, and that was going to be one of my questions just thinking about this interview is, I guess we'll talk a little bit of theory, and then I think eventually, Brodie, we'll get to a point in the episode where let's talk about what is actually in your bag for this tournament coming at Music City, because people will want to hear that. But, what's the theory behind your bag as a pro? Is it more of a, hey, I have these specific molds that I'm always going to lean on, and then per tournament, I'm going to put in extra for the course? Or is it every course you go to, you're like, hey, this is, I'm at Music City Open, I have a completely empty bag, and these are the discs that I'm putting in? Like, which theory do you kind of operate from?
No, I would say there's a staple. These are my core disc, and then I would say there's like accessory discs that I might have to throw in for specific courses. But I'll never take the core disc out, even if the course doesn't require them at all. I still will never take them out. They'll stay in the bag.
Okay. So what are your core discs? Which ones are you like, hey, these are never coming out of my bag?
My Roaches, my Zones, my Buzzes and Meteors, my Raptors, Passions, Vultures, Nukes, and Nuke OSs.
Okay. And then correct me if I'm wrong, is the Passion kind of a newer addition to your bag?
Yeah, that was the one that I switched out from Undertakers to the Passion sometime last year.
And what made you do that switch? What was really the thing that made you switch?
The Undertaker is a great understable disc. It was just very hard to find, because a Vulture, I did have some flippy Vultures, because I want a disc that, well, I'll give you my theory. Or the way I kind of design it. So at each stability, I want to have a disc that's going to go to the right, a disc that's going to go straight, and a disc that's going to go left. So the way I view it is like Passions are like my flippy discs. So I wanted a Passion that's going to go to the right, and I want a Passion that's going to go straight. I don't really need an overstable Passion. Then Vultures, I want a flippy Vulture, I want a straight Vulture, and I want an overstable Vulture. Raptor, I want a flippy Raptor, I want a straight Raptor, I want an overstable Raptor. Which an overstable Raptor is now a Captain Raptor, right? And sometimes that happens where, same thing with like a Nuke, right? An overstable Nuke is very similar to like a Nuke OS in some instances. So that's how I kind of set up my bag, of where I want I want those 3 stabilities for the majority of all my discs, except the only exception would be for my flippy understable disc. I'm not looking for an overstable version of that.
Right.
So I couldn't really find like straight Undertakers that well. And the Undertakers that were flippy, they tended to, like, once they got beat in, they tended to almost be too flippy for me. And the passion just seems to the glow passion specifically. And again, a lot of this I think has to do with the runs. I probably could have found a good run of glow Undertakers or something, and it would have worked. It just happened that I have found glow passions to fit that specifically spot. So a beat-in glow passion is my flippy disc, and then off the shelf glow passion is that straight disc for me.
Interesting. Well, that's kind of really interesting. I mean, and I guess that maybe speaks to having a one manufacturer bag versus, like, having access to everything. And again, I'm not a pro, I'm just an AM player, but I kind of think about my bag the same, but a little different. So I'm looking at, okay, here are my mid ranges. I have a neutral mid range. I have a slightly flippy and a very flippy. And then I also have a slightly overstable and very overstable, but they're all probably different molds. Maybe a few of them are different plastics or something that make them a little different. So what you're saying for you is you're like, I like this mold, so I'm going to find different stabilities of that particular mold,
and also a flippy zone. For example, let's go with mid rangers, I guess. A meteor is essentially a flippy buzz, like in the sense of, like, if you're talking about. So let me say it this way. If you did it with Discraft, what you would do is you would go Meteor for your flippy mid-range, you would go Buzz for your straight mid-range, and then you would go, let's say, like Buzz OS for your overstable mid-range, right? And that's what your setup would be. A Meteor, though, however, is not going to have the same flight as a beat-in Buzz. So a flippy Buzz is going to have a different flight than a Meteor. So that's why I kind of want one of each, kind of in that sense of where I can get a different flight with a flippy Buzz, because a Meteor, the shot shape might be throw it on Hyzer, have it flip up to flat and turn a little bit and then come out. That's going to be really hard to do with a Meteor unless I throw it like a little nose up, or I have enough height that I can throw to where it has enough time to come out. If I'm throwing a shot that requires that flight in the woods where I can't, the ceiling's kind of obviously limited, then I have to go with a flippy Buzz, because the Meteor just won't fly that way.
It's unique because we have a lot of, like, when we bring a lot of guests on, we usually approach it from a lot more of the perspective Brad's talking about, but that makes a ton of sense, especially in terms of, like, there is different flights that come from it. I think my biggest question mark would be, so for the casual player who's out on the course, right? Like they don't often, the way you're playing disc golf right now is most of the time you're stepping up to a course, like we're in Mill Ridge this week, and you're spending a week dialing in 18 holes. So you're like, okay, when you get to those decision points where it's like, am I throwing my neutral to overstable Meteor, or am I throwing my flippy Buzz? You kind of have the opportunity to feel that out. Whereas the casual player who, let's say, is only playing once a week or something like that, that analysis paralysis, that could be the drawback of going the other method, right? Is that they don't have the chance to play it all week to kind of dial it in. So in that instance, like, do you ever find when you're doing your tournament prep, like, is there ever difficulty in that process of, like, oh man, I'm having a really hard time figuring out it's the beat-in version of this or the neutral to overstable of this? Like, do those ever conflict, or is it usually pretty obvious?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certain situations where multiple discs can work. For example, like the example I kind of gave at the beginning of this, right, is I could go Captain Raptor, I could go Venom, or I could go Machete. All three of those I can throw in the circle on hole 17 this week with a forehand. but does one fit that shot better than the other three? And I think that's honestly what a lot of it boils down to is, sure, I can adjust and throw the shot that and get them all inside a circle, but am I going to have a higher percentage with those? I think the other thing too is it's not so much that we're out practicing the course and dialing in the course. It's more the amount of times we get to throw our discs so that we know exactly how they fly. Where if you are only playing once a week, there might be, especially if you just go to a course and play, there might be, 2-3 weeks that you go without even throwing a disc. And so maybe you don't really remember exactly how it flies. And then another thing that I struggled with as well was as I was going through learning new discs, being a brand new player, my form and the way I threw discs changed drastically. So a disc that really might have worked for me a month from now might be absolutely terrible. And just to give you like an idea is like I used to my distance driver for my entire first year on tour was a Glow Nuke SS. That is now my roller disc. So that just kind of shows you that as my form changed, as my speed changed, so did my disc. And if I'm an amateur and I'm playing once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever, it's gonna be tough to really get dialed in with my disc because I'm not throwing them that often. And then I would say on top of that too, when you aren't consistently able to throw a disc, right? So if you are an amateur, let's say, and you're not I'm assuming that you're probably not the most consistent when it comes to throwing. A lot of times you might be blaming the disc for it not doing what you thought it should do when in fact it's how you threw it. And so that can cause a lot of problems, I think, for a lot of amateurs is when you're not when you throw a disc and you're like, this disc is really flippy and you throw it and it doesn't turn and you're like, well, what the heck? I thought this disc was flippy. Now you're like, I need to go find a new disc. I need to go buy something. I need to try something else. And it's like, well, you threw that nose up. So that's why it wasn't flippy. Like not looking at how the disc is coming out of your hand and just assuming that it's the disc's fault and not you, the way that you threw it, I think can cause a lot of problems as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also fair to say too, I mean, it's like the precision that is called for on the course too as a pro. I mean, for you, between the Machete and your Captain's Raptor, if you're 20 feet one way or the other, that may mean the difference between a birdie and a par for you. Yep. And that's a big deal when you're battling the field that you're battling. So, I mean, as an amateur, if I'm like 10 feet either way, it doesn't matter a whole lot to me. But you need that precision, right?
And also, like I have a decent amount of nukes in my bag. If I gave those nukes to, an MA3 player and they threw them, they would all fly the same. Mm-hmm. They would have a really hard time distinguishing why do you have this many nukes in your bag? So that's another thing to kind of think about it too, is like based off of your skill level, based off of your form, based off of all these things, sometimes discs are just not going to react and fly the way that they're maybe designed to do. So that's just something to take into account as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been playing just shy of 3 years at this point, and I feel like I'm just now seeing a difference really in like that 9-10 speed category, whereas before everything from basically 9 speed up flew extremely overstable and like relatively the same distance. Mm-hmm. And now that, again, Robbie showed me some stuff with my form, my release is much better, my angle is much better. I'm really seeing the difference, even in, like you're saying, same plastic disc, maybe slightly different weight, or same weight, different plastics. I'm really seeing the differences that there can be. And I can only imagine, pro level, what that looks like too. So yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense.
When I first started playing, I want to say I was throwing Undertakers for most of the fairways, I think for most of my fairways. And I was throwing buzzes, and I would go to a field and throw, 10 buzzes and 10 Undertakers and then go out and pick them up. And it's like some buzzes were further than the Undertakers and some Undertakers were further than like there was no distinguished difference in distance, right? And obviously, like you can manipulate the disc, right? I can throw a buzz 500 plus feet, but if I'm just throwing stock shots, which is what you should do when you go out to the field, is like work on actual shots, not working on how far can I throw a buzz. my stock buzz shot is looking somewhere in the 360 to 400. Like that's kind of depending on the angle that I release. Where now, that spot where the Undertaker was is now more like the Vulture or Passion. Now that is like 400 to 460, 450. I walk out, I pick up all my buzzes, and then I keep walking to pick up all my fairway drivers. And when I first started playing, that definitely was not the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and kind of what I'm hearing you say also is you're using the disc as it's designed to. So you're not throwing like a buzz that's a 5-speed. You're not throwing it with the intensity of a 7-speed disc to try to get distance, right? You're using the buzz to hit those like very mid-range, we'll call them wedge, like iron shots that you would like, if we're talking golf language. Speaking of like golf language, and I'm sure you've been asked this 100 times. I don't know if I've heard this answer before, but obviously you have a golf background. What was your biggest lesson or a couple lessons you brought over from golf to disc golf, or did you really find that any of that transferred super well?
I mean, I wish it transferred more. The type of courses that we play, unfortunately, course management doesn't really come into play all that often. Mm-hmm. You really need to have the conditions be really, really bad. And I think, DDO, for example, one of my best finish on tour, the conditions were absolutely terrible. They were very windy and you couldn't play this super pedal to the metal, aggressive disc golf. You had to play probabilities. You had to play the wind. Mm-hmm. You had to play the course. And I felt like I did that obviously fairly well because I don't think my skill set at that point in time was, a top 5 or top 10, but I was just able to play the course really well. And unfortunately, a lot of these courses that we play, there really isn't, Robbie's caddying for me this week. There are, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 holes that I can think of where we're going to have to like make a decision when we get there. Other than that, like the decision's made. There is no, I'm walking up to hole 1. I'm throwing the same shot all 3 rounds. I'm not having to think or anything like that. So that element kind of got taken out, but I would say that's the only one that probably really transferred over. Mm-hmm. And maybe like the practice. I think that's a big one too. Maybe like how I practice for golf. Mm-hmm. I've kind of been able to transfer that over in disc golf as well.
Yeah. And then, I mean, and this is an assumption, but I mean, as far as like attention to detail in your form, maybe has that transferred over too, or do you feel like it's too different?
I think it's too free flowing. I think golf is a very specific movement that you can, film and break down and try to get better. And also you have a club in your hand, so there's a lot more to manipulating it. I think this is like more kind of if you think of like a quarterback in football, I'm sure they do a little bit of like mechanical work, a little bit if they really, really need it. But when you look at the quarterbacks in the NFL, they all throw a little bit different. And it's like, if it works for you, then just get really good at that. Right. And I think it's similar because it is a throwing motion. I think sometimes some AMs maybe get locked in a little too much on what perfect form is. And I don't think it is. I don't think there is a thing as perfect form. Because I'll tell you right now, if you look at, I'll use Paul Macbeth or Bradley Williams or Mason Ford, guys that you look at and you're just like, man, they are so smooth. That looks so good. So if that's all you saw and you're like, this is perfect form. And then I showed you a video of Calvin Heimberg throwing a backhand. Mm-hmm. And I said, do you think this guy's good or not? If I literally was like, these guys have perfect form, showed you Ricky's backhand. And I said, and I would say, are these guys, do you think these guys are good? Your answer would be no. Because they don't have perfect form, or they don't look like those other guys. And, those are 2 of the best players in the world. So that's where I think some AMs maybe get locked up a little bit too much on form.
Okay.
So I want to highlight something that I think like you've done really well on. You've touched on, we've talked about it this week. So a lot of people listening, right, they hear there's this view of the Pro Tour, right? Like, okay, what do you do on tour? And I really appreciated hearing this week, like you and Ezra saying multiple times, like, oh, what are you doing after this? Oh, I gotta go work. Like I got not work out. I gotta go work. Is how you're describing it. Meaning I'm going to the field. I'm going to practice putting. I'm going to work on these things. How much, like, would you say, and that's helped obviously escalate you really quickly up the ladder, being willing to put in that work. So if you were addressing an AM who says, hey, I play with my friends whenever, and I'm just tired of being the worst player in my group. Like, it's so frustrating. How, and they're like, you know what? I'm going to take the Brodie Smith approach. I'm going to work. What are you focusing on in your, like, in those work sessions? Obviously it rotates a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And just to kind of reiterate, as far as like how to get better at something, this happened a lot in Ultimate Frisbee, where Ultimate Frisbee really is like, there's two main key components to being good at Ultimate Frisbee. You have to be able to throw, and you have to be able to be athletic, right? You have to be fast, run forever, cut, all those things. If you come to Ultimate Frisbee practice, which we had, I think at this time we had like 3 or 4 times a week, and we would practice for about 2 hours or so. That's how long we had the fields for. If you came and you were using that Ultimate Frisbee practice to get better at throwing, you were not going to get better at throwing. The amount of throws that you got at an Ultimate Frisbee practice, 25, 30, 50, 60, even if it was 100, you're not going to get better at throwing by throwing 100 times in Ultimate Frisbee a couple times a week. And that's it. I think it's very similar in disc golf. A lot of people, they go and play with their buddies, like you said, right? They go out, play a round, play 2 rounds, play 3 rounds with their buddies. And then they're like, all right, that's it. I'm going to get better. If you're actually trying to get better, because that is not a good way of getting better. If you actually are trying to get better, you need to identify the areas of your game that are holding you back, the areas of your game that you're not good at, and you need to get better at those. You need to start putting a lot more time into those areas. And then the areas that you are good at, you need to put time into those areas as well to get even better. That's really how you get good at any sport. And you know, if putting is the thing that you struggle with the most, you're like, I can throw a forehand 500 feet, I can throw a backhand 600 feet, I'm sick. But you're just like, I can never win these tournaments, whatever. And you're like, well, you're putting 40% inside a circle. I would probably spend my 70% of my practice time putting, and then the other 30% would be throwing. So that way I am still getting better at throwing, because it's not like I'm just not throwing at all. I'm still putting time and effort into throwing better, but I am putting way more time, way more weight in my putting. So that way, hopefully, as my, if throwing's up here and putting's here, my throwing is still going up, but my putting's going up faster.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the idea.
Yeah, I think that's probably an error, and I know I've done it. It's like you're like, okay, well, my putting really stinks, so I'm gonna give 100% of my time to putting, but my drives are just fine. But then my drives start to tank because I'm spending all my time putting. So that sounds like, yeah, that's a big. I've definitely been subject to that error myself.
And the thing with putting too, again, it kind of goes back to like, there's not a perfect form. You're trying to get the disc in the basket. Figure out the best way of you doing that. And just to give an example, because obviously I think the hardest part of putting is putting under pressure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But there are some people that you give them 10 putts to, putt in practice from 30 feet, and they might not make one. So regardless of whether they have pressure or not, they're not good at putting. So the first thing is, how do you got to get better at putting without pressure, and then obviously incorporate the putting with pressure. But just as an example, we did, was it last year or 2 years ago? We did some foundation thing where, how many putts can you make? Can you make 10 putts in under 10 seconds from 20, whatever. We did this thing. And I realized the fastest way of doing that was like forehand, like just zipping him like that. The first time I tried it, I was absolutely terrible. I think I made like 1 or 2. But the more I did the motion, the better I got. And by the time, like after like 20 or 30 minutes of attempting it, I was actually pretty good from 20 feet throwing drivers forehand. And I think that's ultimately what putting is. Like if you told me, Brodie, you have to start putting this way. Yeah, initially I would be really bad. But if I just kept doing it over and over and over and over again, I would get eventually pretty decent at putting that way. So I think some people get hung up again with the form, and maybe that's what's like blocking them is like, well, I don't know the proper way of putting, so I don't want to practice putting until I know the proper way. It's like, dude, just put in the hours. Like, just it's the same thing with basketball. I mean, heck, if you gave me a basketball and told me I had to shoot like this, if I went out right now and did 3-pointers like this, I might make 1 out of 10. But if you gave me a week to practice shooting 3-pointers like this in basketball, by the end of that week, I'd probably be dang good. Now, obviously, basketball shooting like this, probably not super effective with the actual sport. But disc golf, there is no defender. There is nothing to stop you from having to do it a certain way. A lot of these other sports, the form and stuff like that, is because you have other variables that are causing you to throw a certain way or hit a certain, whatever it may be. In disc golf, there's nothing. You can figure out what works for you and then just hammer it home and get really freaking good at it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I think you kind of self-correct. If you spend 2 hours a day putting, you're going to see what's wrong with your particular form very quickly. And
exactly.
Like, oh, I'm pulling to the right because you're just spending time doing that. So you can auto kind of correct.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yourself. So,
it's also a perishable skill. I want to highlight that. And like you talk about the work of like, we finish round 1 on Monday, get done with the practice round, and you were like, my putt feels unrecognizable. Like it's not it. Obviously, you putted last week. Obviously, you putted the week before. So now you're going through the rest of the week, and Brodie's walking up to every single hole, and he grabs all 3 of his roaches out of his bag, and he makes 9 putts at least on every single hole while we're playing. And then we finish the round, and he's putting on the practice area, and then he comes home. And then there's putting that there is. With even putting, I feel like that's a skill that someone's going to put that 70% time into to rise. And they're going to be like, oh, my putting's great. I'm going to touch it for a little while. And they're going to go back to that 100%. I would say putting should never drop lower than 30% if you actually want to stay competitive in terms of how you're investing your time, because you will lose it. Like it goes away so fast if you aren't consistently like practicing the reps. And I think that, like you said, Brodie, goes down to, right, knowing your discs, knowing how they fly. Putting, you're definitely going to lose it. I want to ask a question that's very specific to you, Brodie, regarding your choice of distance driver. So you're a Nuke guy. What drew you to the Nuke over other Discraft molds? Because it's a little different than if you did probably an in the bag with most other pros, perhaps maybe besides Ezra.
They go the farthest.
Okay. Simple
there
as
it is. I love it.
I mean, what other discs, I guess, would you compare them to? I guess, like what are other people throwing instead of a Nuke that are Discraft? Like cranks?
I see a lot of like Forces. I've seen Chandler, obviously was the crank guy.
Forces don't go as far as Nukes.
The Surge at all comparable, or
doesn't
is it too on the understable side?
Yeah, way too flippy. Doesn't go as far.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you mentioned you don't have any rollers in your bag. Do you have any Nukes that are beat into the point of being rollers?
That pink one,
Nuke SSs.
That pink one. If I really need to, because I throw rollers a lot differently, I think, than most people that I've played with throw. A lot of people that throw rollers, they like getting on top of it and like ripping it down to the ground. I like throwing more flippy discs on Hyzer or flat. And so they're pushing the first 100 feet, 150 feet, and then they're cutting into the ground, and then they're slowly lifting up. Now, if you're out in the open and you just like throw a roller, I'm throwing that shot. There are some times, though, where you do need to get a disc. You don't have as much movement because the shot I just described, I need 40 or 50 feet left to right because the disc is going to start out and then move 40 or 50 feet before it gets to the ground. Yeah. If I don't have that and it's a roller, then you have to go with like a nuke that's flippy. So that way I can get over on top of it, release it on Annie, get it on the ground. So it's not really moving left to right that much, but then it's also more of an overstable beat-in disc. So it's going to travel more in a straight line. Because if I did that same thing with my flippy roller disc, which I use a Janus Thrasher and a Nuke SS, if I did that roller's going 50 feet because it's hitting the ground and it's immediately jumping to the right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So something we talk about on the podcast a lot, Brodie, we call them Griffin discs, but they're like this mythological disc or one-of-a-kind disc that's beat into this point that does something very specific. And, you know, us being amateurs, we have a lot more probability of losing them or whatever. So, like, I mean, I know you're talking about your Janus Thrasher or this Nuke SS that rolls for you perfectly. So are you carrying a couple of those at a time and just working those into your bag just in case? Or do you just kind of cross that bridge when you get there?
I try not to have that many discs that aren't replaceable.
Right.
Like we lost a disc today. Calvin ended up actually getting it back. Shout out to Calvin. But we lost a disc today, and I could kind of tell that Robbie was like a little bit more, not a little bit, a lot more dedicated to try to get it back. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, it's gone. Mm-hmm. I'll just get another one. So okay. I try not to have that many discs in my bag where if I lose it, I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, how the heck am I going to continue on? That did happen to me one time. First time playing Northwoods Black. This was before it was Northwoods Gold or whatever it's called now. Or was it Northwoods Gold and then Northwoods Black?
I think it was gold to black.
Okay, so first time playing Northwoods Gold. Hunter was catting for me. Did not have a good warm-up area. That course just does not have a good place to warm up. So we're like in this weird park with the playground and there's some trees and we're throwing shots. At this time, I'm throwing I believe it is actually a Thrasher. No. What was it? Was it I think it is a Thrasher. I think it was like a lime green Thrasher. And I'm throwing this disc, warming up with it. This is how I also learned, I've talked to this many times, but maybe someone on here hasn't heard me say it, so this is a good one. When you're doing like warm-ups or field work or whatever it is, I lay out all the discs I'm about to throw, and I take a picture of them. Because just counting sometimes, if you just count, like I threw 15 discs, sometimes you forget what disc you're missing. And by taking a picture, I can see exactly, oh, I don't have this disc. And it kind of helps me remember what that shot was. Like, oh, yeah, that did hit that tree and then shot this way. I wasn't doing that back then. Mm-hmm. I wasn't even counting. So me and Hunter just went out, got all the discs, put them in the bag, went to the first tee. Guess what disc I need for the first tee? The green Thrasher. So my name gets called. I go to Hunter and I start looking for it. And I'm like, it's not in this bag. That's not in this bag. And I start freaking out. And it ends up, that disc, I threw 3 of the first 4 holes. And I just was like, I have no answer. I don't know what to do. So that made me, learn how to properly, warm up, take photos, not lose disc. But also that made me learn that I cannot be super reliant on one disc. And now it's like, if I do lose a disc, I can probably replace it with something else. Or even if I lose it during a tournament, there's a disc that's in my bag that's close enough to it to where I can just manipulate the disc a little bit and get close enough to manage. Versus in that scenario, I felt like I had no chance of completing the round. I was like, this disc is gone. I'm doomed.
And that's probably an advantage too of like your theory on, okay, I like the Raptor, so I'm going to get each variety of Raptor. So if you lose your super flippy Raptor, your neutral Raptor, you can probably throw a similar shot, is what you're saying. Versus like mine, I only have I have one flippy Vulture that I lean on that has a very overstable finish. And if I lose that one, I really don't have a disc that I can make do that. So that's interesting. No, I think that's a great perspective to have, especially, we talk about building a bag and what the do's and don'ts and different theories. I think that's a great one that I haven't really thought about. So
yeah, I only have like off the top of my head, I have like a ringer, a soft X ringer. That's just like the flippiest thing in the world. But I'm not really throwing that in any situation that I can lose it. So that's a very like utility disc for me in the woods. So I'm never actually really going to lose that one. So I don't really have a replacement if I do end up losing that. And then I have like a really good beat-in jawbreaker that flies really nice for me. It's super easy to beat in a jawbreaker zone. So I'm not really too worried about that one. And other than that, every disc, I'll tell you this much. There are, the jawbreaker zone, the ringer, my clear get freaky zone. I think that's the only disc that I had starting the last year's season.
Really? Okay.
And I would say the majority of the time it wasn't like, this disc isn't doing what I need to do anymore. It's because it's at the bottom of the lake. You know, and I just had to replace it with something else. So
not like that Sky Streak, am I right?
The Sky Streak, that's another one that is a very unique disc. But again, I'm not throwing the Sky Streak across like a 300-foot water carry.
Right. Yeah.
I refuse to throw your Sky Streak even in the pond at Peaksview, or not Peaksview, at wherever we filmed our first video at. And I was like, there was a little bit of water off to the right that you could easily get out, get it out. And you were like, just be careful. They can't replace that disc. And I was like, and back in the bag.
Yeah.
Hey, I looked for 4 months and I finally found him one. He has one. He has a replacement.
I do have one. I think I actually have two now. I think I have a black one and a lime green one.
Yeah,
but they aren't nearly as soft. Like the black one's pretty stiff.
Yeah, it's like an ultimate. Like it's very like that, very hard plastic.
Yeah.
So interesting. Well, I before we wrap up here, I don't want to go completely through the whole podcast without you kind of, if you want to give us a brief rundown of like your bag, you don't have to get super specific. If there's anything you want to point out, that would be great. Also, I want to point out something else about your bag first. Maybe you still do this, but you kind of go, I guess, as far as like placing discs in your bag, you put your most used disc in the middle and then just kind of feather out from the center, correct? Or do you do that differently now?
Yeah, I do putters. I kind of go with like speed, I guess, is what I do. Speed and stability.
From the middle, right?
No, I do right to left now. So I don't know if that's actually really that cool.
Okay.
I don't remember. Right. Maybe I did do that in the past. I do know I put my putters in backwards. Hunter hates that. In the putter pouch.
Yeah.
I put them in backwards compared to what Hunter says they should be put in. And sometimes I flip them. I don't know. I don't have there's not like a specific way that I actually like to have them facing. So if Robbie is carrying the bag, I like to have the under part of the disc facing Robbie.
Yeah, I would say that's normal.
Yeah, I would say that's normal too. That doesn't seem weird to me at all.
So maybe Hunter's the one doing it wrong.
Maybe Hunter is the wrong one. Or maybe I was doing the other way. I don't know.
So are you, if Robbie's carrying the bag, I'm looking at Robbie's back with your bag. Are you slow on the left, high speed on the right, or opposite?
Slow on the right. So Challenger OS.
Okay. 2
buzzes. And then I go my Passions, my Vultures, my Raptors, my Captain Raptor, my Nukes, and then my Venom Nuke OS.
Okay, awesome.
And then I have another Venom and Nuke OS in the like tongue.
Okay. Yeah. See, that's the way I do mine. Robbie, I believe, said it was backward to the way he does his. Correct?
I go opposite direction.
Yeah, which I think is the case for most people. So
I think I think you can do whatever you want. The only psycho move that I've ever seen is when people do like all of one color. That seems way too hard to make sure you get the disc that you want. And then also, how do you, I don't know. I feel like I have like a couple that are like kind of the same color, and I pull them all the time, like incorrect discs all the time. And so it's like, if all my discs were pink, I feel like I would just constantly be pulling a disc out and be like, oh, that's not the one I want. Pull this one. Oh, that's not. So I don't know how people do it. Maybe they can enlighten me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's get. Well, I think you kind of went through your molds there quickly. That's really good. I mean, people are going to want to hear that, but I think it's really, you definitely embrace mold minimalization for sure.
Yeah.
You're not out there, and I mean, maybe the one manufacturer helps, but I mean, there's plenty of molds this craft has. You could carry all of them if you wanted to.
This is do you know how many feet this course is? Is this 9,500 or something? Rough like
9,977.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so this is almost a 10,000 foot course. It's got some holes that I guess you could like list as wooded or like wooded-ish, and then mostly open. The only disc I'm throwing on this course, I'm not gonna. As of right now, I don't throw the Challenger OS at all. I don't. So zones, I'll be throwing zones. I'll be throwing. I don't even think I throw a buzz. So zones.
I don't think you have buzzes
passion.
or meteors.
Yeah. Zones, passion, raptor, vulture, nuke, and then maybe a nuke OS here and there, and that's it. So there's 5 molds that I'll be throwing on at this tournament.
That's interesting. And why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think
that's all you need?
Well, yeah, I understand that part, but what do you think? Do you think it's just your skill? Like you don't have, I guess, is there not as many gaps that you need to fill for a course that long, or you just have all the shots you need out of those particular molds? I mean, what do you have to do to minimalize it down to like, hey, I'm playing this pro level course and I only need 5 molds?
Well, I'm trying to think, like, even if it was a crazier course, I have those 5. The ones I'm not throwing are a Buzz, a Meteor, my Challenger OS. That's it. Pretty much it. So, like, I think I only really carry like 8 molds that I would probably throw like normal stock tee shots on.
Yeah.
Or up shots. And then I obviously have like the ringer, which is I might throw that once an entire tournament. The Sky Streak, I might throw that 2 or 3 times an entire tournament. So there's some discs like that, or a roller disc, right? There's certain discs like that I might throw a few times in a whole tournament. But other than that, like I don't really have, I don't know. I don't think if you do it the way I do it, where it's like, I'm just going to get a run of overstable, a run of straight, and then beat in the straight discs to flippy. Like, I don't know. I would much rather have, 4 or 5 nukes that all fly a little bit different than one nuke, a nuke OS, a crank, a Zeus. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
Like that's kind of the way I think about it.
Yeah. Well, the parallel I'm trying to draw is, I think maybe, and I mean, I'm guilty of this now. I'm trying to figure out my discs again because I added 60 feet to my drive with one form change. And so all of my discs are now flying differently.
Yeah.
So is there, I have all these different molds. Am I causing myself more pain by having all these molds? Should I go back to the minimalist bag and say, okay, I'm just going to try out, I really like how the nebula feels, so I'm just going to bag a bunch of nebulas that all fly a little differently.
Well, like when your bag right now, if you went out to the field and threw every single disc on your normal shot, so I don't know if that's flat or a little Annie or a little Hyzer or whatever it is, if you just did that 100% power, every single disc in your bag, how many of them are flying differently?
Yeah, so if I'm throwing all of them, and here's the problem, Brody. I had like really bad form, so I was releasing on Annie. I was like pulling like up across my body, and
Mm-hmm.
now from like the just the grip change I did, I have like a baby Hyzer release now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I would say that I'm throwing farther with less power now too, because I'm not trying to force it across my whole body. So, if I'm throwing everything, I mean, I feel like my putters and my mid ranges all have enough variance that they're all going to fly a little differently. And but when I start getting up into those fairways and drivers, I mean, if I'm being honest, they're not going to fly a whole lot differently at this moment.
Yeah, and I would say that's kind of what I do, right? Whenever a new Discraft mold comes out, I go, I get 5 or 10 of them or however many, and I go out to a field and I throw them. And then I'm like, okay, what does that fly like? That flies like this. And so then I get those discs and then I throw those discs with those other ones as well and see. So I did this with the last one was the Athena, I think it was, right? The Athena came out. I threw it and I was like, this kind of flies like a vulture. So then I went and got my vultures and threw it. It went the same distance and if the flight was exactly the same. Yep. The only difference was how it felt. So, and I think sometimes too, like that, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing that Discraft makes and other companies make a bunch of discs that all do the same exact thing, especially with how some runs of them fly a certain way and some runs fly differently, right? You're going to see a lot of overlap. I don't think that's a bad thing because you're going to have a disc that for whatever reason, you think this disc feels the best in your hand. Like this is, you always hear this, oh, it feels so good in my hand. Like there's certain discs that there's not that many discs that I don't like how they feel. Like the only ones that jump out to me is like the Rattler, the Comet. Like those just feel terrible. I feel like if I try to throw a good shot with those, I have no chance of.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I'm not really picky when it comes to it. But like Nukes, for example, I think one of the reasons why a lot of people on Discraft don't throw a nuke is how wide the rim is. And so a lot of people just don't feel comfortable trying to throw a disc that wide. Ezra has kind of bounced back and forth. He throws a lot of forehands with a Zeus because his forehand grip feels better with a Zeus. He feels like he gets a better, cleaner release because of the smaller rim compared to the nuke. So to me, that's completely fine. But like the Athena was basically a vulture. It was not going to do anything differently. So I could have really confused myself a lot by putting the Athena in my bag and also having the vulture. Because then you get to the point of where it's like, what the heck? Why am I picking the Athena over the vulture? The other one was like the Venom. Now, the thing with the Venom, it is very difficult. I don't know why. It is very difficult to find overstable nukes that are domey. So nukes that go far but are overstable. Very hard to find. The Venom, for whatever reason, they were able to make in the first run that we had, they were able to make very domey, overstable Venoms. So a disc that is hard for me to find is an overstable far nuke. I have the blue one that I throw a lot. Robbie's seen me throw that one a lot. And then I maybe have like a couple of replacements with that one, but that's about it. The Venom is a very similar flight to that disc. So that was a very appealing disc to me because now instead of me having to try to find an overstable nuke, which is very hard to find, I can just have the Venom. And so to me, a Venom is not a Venom, it's an overstable nuke. So there's that kind of thought process as well when it comes down to it. But for the most part, like I wanted an overstable vulture, for example, right? Really hard to find that. So what do? We did a run of Get Sneakies, and those are really freaking overstable. And I've got like 20 of them. So I'm good for the next 10 years probably. So like that's how I do it, I guess.
Okay. No, I think that makes sense. I think there's a bunch of different ways to look at it, and I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from both things. I think, in a world where you can throw every disc, I mean, sometimes you just want to throw all of them, but you really do got to you have to find what feels nice and what feels good in your hand. But I think feel translates to confidence probably. So you're confident with the feel in your hand, you're confident you're going to get a good release, and you're confident in the flight. And I think there definitely is something to be said once you get to, I mean, it's always evolving, right? I'm sure, I mean, your bag's pretty set now, you said, but I'm sure leading up to that point, your bag was always revolving because you're trying to figure out what you like, what you believed in, what you were confident in. So
yeah, and a cool little story about practicing with Calvin. I got a practice round with him last year at Northwoods. I think he had 3. I think they were T-birds, or there was some fairway driver, and he had like 3 of them, and he literally was like, called them 1, 2, and 3. So I don't know. I can't. Let's just say it was a T-bird. He would be like T-bird 1, T-bird 2, T-bird 3, and he'd throw it and be like, "Oh, it's not T-bird 1," and then he'd throw the next one and be like, "Okay, it's a T-bird 2," and I just think that's so much easier to do, to have one mold and have each one fly a little bit different than have 3 different molds. And maybe it's doing the same thing, but to me, it just seems like a no-brainer to have a disc that you just like really like and just get that to fly different ways. So then you're just rock. So like Calvin plays that course and just throws a T-bird off of 18 different T-pads. He's just throwing T-birds all over the place. Or I play that course and I'm just throwing vultures all over the place. I'm not throwing a vulture, an Athena, an Onyx, an Undertaker. I'm trying to think of some other fairway drivers from Stalker. Yeah. Like, a lot of these discs do the same exact thing. So just find the ones that you really, really like and then just rock with those.
And I think, like, even I'm just thinking about literally what we did today, right? So we all week been throwing shots all over the course. And today we didn't play a full round. It was, here's a problem shot that we have. And it wasn't like you went and pulled out vultures and you went and pulled out like forces or anything like that. It was grab the nukes, through the different stability nukes, and even went, okay, it could be this one. I guess we'll read it on the wind. And so it just makes it very easy on the practice shot of like, we know that it's going to be a nuke. So it's just what color nuke, what plastic. So yeah, I think it does make the shot selection easy. And yeah, that variance even on trying to figure out the islands. Like, could you make other ones work? Yes. But that machete, there's just so much confidence in you're throwing it really, like, you throw it well, you don't have to think about it a lot when you throw it. Why would we not throw that disc? Because yeah.
And sometimes too, it's like, sometimes it is also a difference in not just changing the disc, but like manipulating the disc. So, okay, I'm not going to, if I throw this one flat, it's not going to work. But if I throw it on a little bit of hyzer, it's perfect. So you don't necessarily always have to be like, well, I want to throw this shot on flat, so I need to find the disc that works perfectly for it to float. Like sometimes it's like, just find the disc, manipulate the disc a little bit on hyzer, and then boom, you got it. So I don't know. I think a lot of that maybe does come with, going back to that one of the first questions we were talking about, what have you learned in Ultimate that I've transferred over? I would say that's also another big one that I just kind of thought of was Ultimate. You have one disc, so you have to manipulate the disc to change the flight of it. So I'm not scared to do that. I'm not scared to release something on a big hyzer or release something on a big anhyzer. And if you're only throwing one angle all the time, I think you can be very successful and that works very well. But you're going to get to certain holes that just you need to throw something different for it to be the best, for you to give you the best chance. And I think you're seeing that too with some of the top players now, that they're comfortable throwing backhand, forehand, different angles.
Yeah, and I think too, and just wrapping up the conversation on mold minimalization versus not. But I mean, I'll be honest, I think everybody can probably relate to this. I have 3 different molds I'm convinced fly the farthest for me. And I have a shot that I'm like, okay, I need something to go pretty far, this distance, whatever. And I'm like, oh, well, today I feel like an FD. And then today I feel like a Vulture. Today I feel like a Thrasher. And it just, the practice isn't there, coming back to the time. You know what I mean? The time of,
I think that's huge. I think if you can, if you have a distance driver that you're like, if I get to an open hole and I can throw whatever shot I want, it's this disc. and you get many reps with that, you're going to have more confidence in that disc moving forward than what you're saying of where if you're like cycling that shot between 4 or 5 different discs, you're just, you're decreasing your time with it. So,
yeah. No, well, hey, we appreciate it for, going through that with us, Brodie. I think it's just,
of course,
I know, I mean, this audience, there's probably not a lot of pros, or there may be some people aspiring to be pro, but I mean, even for someone, just like me who likes to play, that doesn't want to be the worst and wants to beat Trevor more often, just to say, for example, but
don't we all?
Yeah, it's just it's good to think about that, and like how do I just elevate my game a little bit, and what do I focus on, and also in the bag, what am I, how much does my disc and shot selection play into that? And the answer is a lot.
And I'll say this too, another good thing to kind of work on to help you get better is one of my favorite courses in Dallas is Dash's track. Really short, technical, wooded course.
Mm-hmm.
If I went there with my bag that I currently have right now, I would throw probably a bunch of different discs on a lot of shots.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I just load my bag up with 20 get freakies. And then I go and I throw 20 get freakies on every single hole. And when I'm done with that round, guess what I'm really freaking good at throwing? A get freaky. And I know what it's going to fly like on this angle. I know what it's going to fly like on this angle. I know when it's going to fly like when I throw full power, half speed, whatever. If you could do that with a lot of your discs, you're going to be way better off than if you're just like specifically throwing one disc one time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something to think about.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
But don't stop buying discs because that is actually fun. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you do, it's the best excuse in the world. Like, gosh, I just suck at putting. I got it. It's the disc. I need a new putter.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, we're all sucked into this game because we like buying a bunch of discs and trying them out. And
yeah.
So
I'm the same way. It's just I like trying out new molds.
Right.
Or not. Sorry. The opposite. I like trying out new discs in the molds that I have.
Right.
So
different plastics, different stuff.
Yeah. So I'm with all you guys. Trust me. I love seeing a new disc, a new box of discs to go out and throw.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, speaking of discs, this is at the end of the podcast, Brodie. We typically do a "What's New in the Warehouse" segment. So
I was going to say you can have your own brand new box of discs coming to you from FoundationDisc.com.
Yeah,
with What's New in the Warehouse.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and hey, before we get to What's New in the Warehouse, I want to point out that you both are in Nashville. Jason's down there vending, and everyone's going to be listening to this on Friday at 5 p.m. But Saturday, Brodie and Robbie are going to be down at the Foundation tent doing a signing. So all of our folks, all the fans down there in the Nashville area, or if you're traveling down to Music City Open, make sure you go check them out after the round on Saturday in the Fly Mart. Brodie and Robbie are going to be down there. We're going to have some Foundation Stamp UV buzzes, some other Foundation Stamp Discraft. We're going to have some Foundation Stamp Innova and Trilogy. So it's all going to be there. All your favorite Foundation accessories are going to be at the tent. So make sure you come down and check out that. So I'm sure you guys will be pumped to see everybody down there. Warehouse. So we got a lot of stuff new in the warehouse this week. It's been absolutely nuts. So let's go Innova first. We have Halo Chargers are out now. We have the Halo Hawkeyes as well. We have our Lone Star stock finally in. So a bunch of Lone Star discs keep going up. And we also have Hooligan discs now that we're carrying. We have the Yeet and the Thread now available. So make sure you check those out. Yep. Mint discs. We have some alternate stamps coming out on the Grackle, on the Diamondback, and on the Phoenix. So make sure you check those out as well. And MVP drop on Friday with the new Fission Hexes. We have Electron Stabilizers, and we also have another disc that's escaping me at the moment. There's the Zenith, the new Plasma Zenith as well. So, and DGA has their Tour Series dropping Friday as well. So Warehouse is going off right now. So make sure you check that all out.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I think our Tour Series announcement is Friday.
Is it? Awesome. Well, you heard it here first. Yep. I know we have them on order, Brodie, and they should be here anytime. So
there you go.
Yep. We're excited for that. But hey, you heard it here first. So make sure you check out the Tour Series announcement on, I'm sure, all Discraft socials, right, Brodie?
I believe so. I think that's where they're going to be posting them.
Awesome.
Well, Brodie, thank you so much for coming on, man. This was a blast. We'll have to have you on. Have to have it on in a future episode as well. Keep the bag theory going. Just a lot of. I appreciate the thoughts, and I appreciate kind of the candidness of just, hey, you want to get better, like stop just playing. So
yeah, if you guys have like a really interesting guest at some point, I think it could be fun. Like unexpectedly, that's not a word. Let me just say surprise. I guess you guys could be like mid conversation with someone, and I'll just can surprise jump in and roast their bag. That could be that. I would love to do that at some point. So you just let me know.
Especially next time we have like a Discraft only bag or someone come on.
And there's like, I carry 27 molds. I actually have a roller bag and a bag I put on my back.
Yeah, we definitely have to do that. That'll be a great time.
Absolutely. So. Because at the end of the day, no matter how many molds they're carrying, if it's good,
you keep in the bag. We'll see you next time. Thanks again, Brodie.